I think we've got the timing pretty well on that. Yeah, we're on 483 episodes, so it wasn't it's different to how it was then. That was when I did it. It was probably more like the sort of stuff you get from Talk Norwich City, Along Come Norwich. It was more of a sort of fan orientated show, match day experience, things like that, which have become much more normal now, haven't they? Technology has moved on to allow people to produce things like we're doing right now, much
exactly
more easily.
Anybody can do it.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I mean,
Like I said, beauty of it,
anybody can do it. Like I've told, this is free. The way we're doing it, it doesn't cost anybody anything. Although I do pay for us to be on Apple. I pay like $20 a year for us to be on Apple Podcasts. That's my contribution to the cause. Yeah. But to actually do this and have it, it's free. So the idea, because I asked my son, okay, because he has his own baseball-centered podcast, is, how are you doing this? I know you're doing it for free. Walk me through the steps so we can have this, all done. Because we're not making any money directly yet. That's a topic for discussion. What we want to do as far as expand our reach, provide different products, provide maybe stuff people to buy. So we're having those discussions, but we're at the nascent stages here, and
monetization of podcasts is another conversation, isn't it? But that's a
tough part. Well, we had Chris Reeve on a couple of weeks ago, so they've
it's an interesting aspect of it all. But so I've always been involved with the Pink and podcast. Obviously, when Michael used to present, and then since he moved on to Athletic, I've presented. So always enjoyed being involved in the pod, and I've always listened to a lot of podcasts. Guardian Football Weekly is sort of the my main football pod. And then articles per week, I suppose sort of 20, 25, something like that. And maybe 4 or 5 of them will be sort of longer reads, feature pieces along that sort of line. So, I run on match days, my main responsibility is running the live blog, the NTFC live blog, which is now moved to the app. And then I interview the player as well, although since the pandemic, me and Michael have taken that in turns, game to game, and then we have the responsibility of sharing the audio from that interview. So it'll be Chris Gorham will lead the interview with the player, and then either me or Michael follow on with a series of our own questions, which probably sort of drill down a bit deeper into the issues and stuff for Sunday or Monday's papers, and then we have to share our audio with any of the national newspaper journalists that want it, basically. So we sort of dovetail like that, although hopefully we'll sort of be able to get back to normal soon and get back to proper mix zones and stuff, and have the opportunity to just sort of grab the players as we want and try our luck at getting an interview with whoever we want after the games, because that's how it used to be before the pandemic.
Right. I mean, I'm seeing, because right now in the U.S. we have the college basketball, the March Madness and stuff going on. And last year, everything was in a bubble. And if anyone was interviewed, the reporter had to be in the stands and the player was, on the court, and they had a very large distance between them. Now they're right next to each other. So everything has really opened up in the last couple months, where they're just normal. It looks like normal interviews, but a couple months ago they still had a bit of a distance in between them. They didn't have to be separated. It wasn't like you're in the stands and I'm on the court. They both were like standing on the court, maybe 5 feet apart. Now they're right next to each other, with the post-game interviews. So
getting back to normal a bit. I will say we've been quite fortunate that the club have pretty much allowed us to keep those things going, even though things have been a struggle this season. We haven't had one game where a player has refused to come out, which has happened in maybe sort of more the distant past now, when things have been really, when they've lost 7-0 at Manchester City or whatever. It's not easy for players to come out and to do those interviews, and sometimes they'll say, "Oh, well, sorry, we've got to catch a plane" or whatever. But we haven't had that at all yet this season. We've always had access to players, and even during the height of lockdown, during Project Restart, when it was the empty stadiums and we were lucky enough to be in there, at that point we either had to do it over the phone or over Zoom. But we always got a player. I don't remember a game where, despite how low it got at times, we've always had access. And you can compare that to some of the top clubs where I think quite often the local journalists don't even get an interview at all. They've just been told since the start of the pandemic that they can take the club official sort of sanitized videos that go out after the game, and tough luck, you're not getting an interview. So props to Norwich in some ways that we have continued to have access, and the players have always been pretty good with it.
That seems to make more sense, how Norwich is run, and that they would favor the local reporters, local media over the national media. That's the way it should. Yeah, that's honestly the way it should work.
Well, let's be honest. National media doesn't give Norwich a whole lot of love anyway. So, everybody's always complaining that we're last on Match of the Day and things like that. So,
I think some are better than others. You get there's some who are quite regular and they know their stuff with Norwich, but I've definitely been at games. The one that always sticks in my mind, I don't know who this national reporter was, but I was at the first leg of the playoff semi in 2015 at Portman Road, the 1-1 draw with Ipswich. And whoever the guy was sat next to me, I don't even know which outlet he was. I heard him on the phone before the game and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm at Norwich Ipswich today, bloody championship game." And I was like, "Is this guy for real?" I mean, even for a neutral, that's a decent game to cover.
Yeah,
sure. The playoff between a pretty nasty rivalry.
Yeah. Well, he's probably put out because of the travel and all that other stuff. It's like, come on.
Oh, we hear it all. The amount of moaning, groaning. Oh, it's such a long way to Norwich. It's not that far. You don't have to get on a plane, and we have to do it every week to wherever we go around the country. That game in particular as well. I remember saying afterwards that fair play to the Ipswich fans. The atmosphere that day was brilliant because they were desperate. They knew they had to win that game, or as proved to be the case, they pretty much had no chance of beating Norwich because Norwich had finished third under Alex Neil, hadn't they? But they really made a din that day.
Is that the one is that the Tim Klose goal?
No, that was the 1-1, the playoff 2015. So who was it? Johnny Howson equalised, if I'm remembering that correctly.
I think that's correct.
I just know the other one where Tim Klose gets the goal, the famous video where
their poor commentator.
Yeah.
That was one of those moments where, it's just an explosion of noise. They'd have heard that in Yarmouth. It was a remarkable moment. And whenever I see the little clip of the goal played back, it always still makes me laugh, that little burst of pace from Hanley when he realizes he can keep it alive. It always still makes me laugh when people don't realize that Hanley's quick as well, to be honest.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean,
talk about him having the turning radius of a battleship. He's actually quite quick. I mean, he just really is. Yeah, my favorite part of that, the Tim Klose game, to transfer off of the point you made, Dave, was the one that was filmed from the Ipswich stands with them going, "Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit."
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Absolute beauty.
That was chaos. That really was chaos. It was fantastic.
That's what I'm talking about. Okay, so typical match day for you at home and away. What do you do?
Yeah, that follows
for each, and what's distinctly different?
Home's nice and easy. I live in Sprowston, so northern boundary of the city, and just sort of on the outskirts, a bit in the countryside almost. So 10-15 minute drive into the office, park up, walk down the Rowan Road hill, and takes about 10 minutes to get to the stadium, soak in a bit of the atmosphere. But I like to get there nice and early. I normally get there about 2 hours before, have a good look through the programme, have a chat to people, find out a bit of the gossip of what's going on, who might be in the team, and see if you can find anything out a bit early. Get a little bit of food in you, stick on the second pair of socks or whatever if it's a cold day. So home's pretty straightforward, and obviously we've done it so many times. And then we generally nowadays we like to get the podcast out as quickly as we can. So we, me, Connor, Paddy, and Adam get together, walk up the road, and What we try to do, but we sometimes fail. Our former video man, Tony, always used to stop us in our tracks. When we started talking about the game, he'd say, no, wait, keep it back, hold it back. Don't give away the gold yet. Keep it all in your system, because we're about to record a podcast and you almost don't want to talk everything through. So oddly, we'll end up walking up the hill quite quietly, not really saying a lot to each other, because we're all trying to process the game and think about it. And then we get into the office, and then, you know, we'll get around a table and record a pod and let it all flow out, really. And I think that is a good point with a podcast as well, is that where possible, particularly coming out of the pandemic, when you can record a podcast face to face, I think it makes such a big difference, the way you can bounce off each other, and just, you know, read each other's body language and things like that. It's and just audio quality, obviously. But the pandemic has opened up, as we're doing right now, everybody's eyes to how doable it is to record podcasts and videos wherever you are in the world, which is great. It has opened up a whole new sort of world of content for a lot of people, isn't it? So, but still, with the Pinkham podcast, that's how I like it as the host, that whenever possible now, we do it face to face. We do it as soon as we can after the game. But away from home, obviously, that's as we were sort of saying a minute ago, that's not always possible when you've got you know, a 3.5-4 hour journey home from Leeds, and you're getting home at midnight. Then sometimes the pod will have to wait till the next morning, and you'll record it over a Zoom call or whatever the next day. But yeah, away days can be a bit of a grind at times, particularly when form for the team isn't great. It's just a case of usually meeting up at the office at sort of 8 a.m, setting off and on our way. Sometimes London games we can jump on the train. West Ham in particular is one, which is a direct route from Norwich, because the Norwich to London line, you can get off at Stratford, and things like Tottenham, Arsenal, they're all not too bad for us as well. But basically, you know, unless they're in the same division as Ipswich or Cambridge, there isn't a nice short away day. And we were totting up what the Championship. I mean, it's not going to matter to me, because as we'll probably come on to, I'm not going to be covering Norwich next season. But there could be some long old away trips next season. We were tallying it up, and you could have Sunderland, Middlesbrough, Blackpool, Blackburn, Burnley, some Cardiff, Swansea, even Plymouth. Maybe there could be some serious long journeys in the Championship next season.
I even know where most of those places are.
they're all sort of 4 or 5 hours away, basically. Swansea,
yeah.
I think Swansea would still be the longest one.
Yeah. No easy way to get there.
Yeah, so it's everyone's, because when people mention, let's say, a small town or city in the U.S., I generally know where it is. When someone goes, oh, they're playing, Norwich played Rotherham a couple years ago. Like, where is Rotherham? You know, I have to map it and figure out where some of these places are.
Maps.google.com.
yeah, exactly, because I'm just not familiar with some of the geography.
Well, it'd be interesting. Somebody who does my job for, say, the Leicester Mercury or the Derby Telegraph, who are central in the Midlands, their job must be completely different to ours in the amount of travelling we do. Everywhere is just that little bit closer for them. So that's probably like we were joking earlier, where that sort of stems from the national guys. Like, oh God, got to go to Norwich, but it's not that bad. We try to make fun of the journeys. You know, listen to the radio, maybe listen to a few podcasts, listen to a bit of music or whatever, but. You know, occasionally when it's been a bad defeat, the pool car can be a little bit quiet and everyone just leaves.
I mean, if you listen to Rob and Chris, they kind of have a pattern that they have, because they'll usually make a stop on the way up and get some dodgy food, and they'll have their bag of snacks, and a lot of times they're doing some kind of pod or maybe a pre-recorded part of the scrimmage on the way home after a game, and they just make the best of their time, you know, as they can.
Well, we were fortunate, which very rarely happens. A few weeks back, the Southampton game when Norwich were rubbish, but the Rob Butler and Phil Daly were staying in the same hotel as us, because it was a Friday night game, so you can't drive back from Southampton after finishing work at sort of midnight, obviously. And they were in the bar waiting for us when we got back, so we actually got to have a pint and a post-game debrief with them, which very rarely happens, but that was nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Okay, so
where are we at here?
Typical match. Where does he normally sit? At Carrow Road, and then away matches, because I know the way it's all over the place. We had Connor one, and we asked him, some of the same questions.
Well, at home, obviously, in the press box at the back of the City stand. So pretty decent view, but it's a low stand, isn't it? I don't know how many it holds, 6,000, something like that, but it's not a very big stand. So you're not too far from the halfway line. And as the local press, again, as we were saying, we are generally treated pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
We get front row seats in the press box, and over towards the right, but towards the halfway line. So we get decent views. Myself, growing up, I sat in the River End lower tier as a season ticket holder growing up with my stepdad and stepbrother. And then when I was old enough to have a job and earn my own money and pay for a more expensive seat, I progressed to the Barclay lower with my best mate and sat there until I went off to university. So, I've probably watched games from pretty much every viewpoint of Carrow Road at one point or another. My dad's been a season ticket holder on about halfway line, about halfway up as well, like sort of perfect view really in the south stand. Since before the stand was rebuilt in 2003-04. So he's got a great view, and I've sat with him there quite a few times. But away games, you're never quite sure what you're going to get. You sometimes get some horrendous views, but in the Premier League and generally at the newer stadiums, you get very good views nowadays, because the Premier League is pretty stringent on the minimum standards for media areas and things like that. So. For instance, Sheffield United used to have a horrible press box, and after they got a bit of Premier League money, they were able to upgrade it. Middlesbrough have got a really good press area because they have to meet those standards. And I think I'm right in saying that if Norwich manage to get stabilised in the Premier League this time, they will have to upgrade quite a few of their media facilities and things like that as well. A bigger press box. They've already done the media room actually for this year, but because they had to meet those minimum standards. And I think once a team is a Champions League team, they have to accommodate something ridiculous like 150 journalists or something, because you get them from all around the world, and that's why they have these sort of auditoriums. So I don't think Norwich will have to worry about that anytime soon, but they've got a nicer media room.
The media room doesn't look very large. When I've seen some of the pictures from someone sitting in the third or fourth row, it doesn't look as big as I expected it to be.
No, I think they can only accommodate about 40 or 50 in the press box. An estimate. I've never really counted, to be honest. But so I guess the media room probably holds, 60 or 70. So compared to Anfield and the Etihad and places like that, they are huge media rooms, and they're almost like restaurants that they can use as conference facilities or whatever on another day. But Norwich are sort of restricted by the South Stand was rebuilt in the 80s after the fire, wasn't it? So they're a little bit restricted in what they can do, but we shall see. We all know that they want to expand the stadium if they ever can afford it. They've talked about the fact that they have had the sort of studies and preliminary plans all investigated a number of times over the years, but it's obviously going to cost a lot of money. So
and they bought that little strip of road here in the last 24 months too as well, that's going to afford them the access to go backwards behind, because that's the main thing, I think, is that space behind the current stand is what they'll need to go ahead and expand that out to a double decker.
From everything that we hear, I think what they would like to do is go over the top of the City stand, put a second tier on there. How big that would be, I don't know, because I guess they wouldn't want to, because the TV companies love covering games at Carrow Road, because where the gantry is, you get that lovely view where you can still see the castle and the cathedral, and you still get the cityscape over the top of that stand. So I guess they wouldn't want to block that too much. But equally, there is the road behind Carrow Road, which is a busy road. So the actual construction of it would be very complex to arrange. So it's not an easy one. I know it's one they'd have loved to have sort of grasped the nettle on years ago. David McNally, it was talked about then. He was always asked about at AGMs, wasn't he? And it's definitely something they know they need to do in terms of they've been selling out Carrow Road for a long time, and it's something that all fans would like to see. We'd all like to see a safe standing area, but it's a difficult one to do, particularly as we know as the sort of self-funded club.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'll be a question for later.
Just a quick question, Dave. Do you have a favorite stadium? And in that list, if you have a list of stadiums, are any of the old original stadiums like Goodison Park among the list?
I don't like Goodison Park because the press box is like something from the 40s. It's still wooden seats and tiny little rows.
Wow.
But I've got to say Anfield, really, the history and stuff, and it was illustrated again recently in the league game when obviously Norwich had the lead through the Rashica deflected goal, and that when they scored those 2 goals in 3 minutes, me and Paddy turned to look at each other very briefly and just were like, wow, because it was an explosion of noise. The press, it felt like the stadium was shaking. It really was incredible. And just the energy, when they sing "You Never Walk Alone" and stuff, that is obviously special. The last time when was that? So the first game of 2019-20 after promotion, that was when they were celebrating their first opportunity to celebrate the Champions League win together at Anfield, wasn't it? And that night when they sang "You'll Never Walk Alone" was incredible. It really was. That wasn't quite as noticeable this time because it was a bit more of a run-of-the-mill game for them. They're just playing Norwich. Right. They know they're probably going to win. But the way the game unfolded, with Norwich winning and giving it a good go, they knew that if they lost that game, that was the title race over. And look at the Premier League table now. It's very much a title race, isn't it? It's neck and neck between the two of them. And there's still a game to come between the two of them. But if Liverpool would have messed up that day, it was over. And when they scored those 2 goals, I don't know if I've ever experienced an atmosphere like that. It really was something pretty special. But I've got to say Leeds as well. Ellen Road, they make some noise. It's vociferous there, as we saw the other week. And when they scored that goal again, it felt like the stadium was shaking because it meant so much to them. And obviously you're envious of them, and it was so disappointing from a Norwich point of view. Mm-hmm. And you want those moments for Norwich. The Manchester City final whistle, the closer equaliser against Ipswich, the Hernandez Boxing Day equaliser against Forest, all those amazing moments. That's what football's all about. But Leeds, the game, the Farker game when Norwich won 3-1 with the 2 Vrancic goals and stuff, that was a special atmosphere as well. So I really like Ellen Road and I really like Anfield. But some of the other big stadiums leave you pretty cold. Old Trafford, the Emirates, Etihad, there's not really much of an atmosphere. The new Tottenham Stadium is a beautiful place. It's an incredible stadium, but I certainly don't think it's got anything like the atmosphere of Anfield.
You mentioned some of the camera and Spurs. White Hart Lane, the camera angle was so close there. And in a new stadium, it's so much higher. And I enjoy watching games on TV when the camera is so close to the action. It's a lot easier to follow, and you're like more involved in the game. The game is closer to you, as opposed to way up high and like, who is that? Who's got the ball? Sometimes it's
little dots out there like Subetos.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I went to watch an England game at Old Trafford once when I was at university. As I say, I was at Stoke, so it's only an hour away. It's pretty close. I can't even remember who it was against. I think it wasn't someone great. It was Macedonia or Lithuania or something like that in a qualifier. And we were sat in the top tier behind one of the goals. And it was 0-0. It was an awful game. And but Rooney nearly scored at the other end, and we had no idea what was going on. They were, like you say, they were just dots. You're in the same stadium, you couldn't tell if they'd scored, let alone if somebody was offside or anything like that. You were just waiting for the reaction of the other end of the stadium, basically.
Well, that might, I keep thinking of all the things that we can look forward to next year, and in the event that the club dropped down, and the idea that a lot of these other stadiums that we'll be seeing again next year will have the better camera angles. I think, because they will be closer. It's a little more intimate. So
quite a lot of
I
the
just
time.
keep looking on the sunny side of things. That's all we can do at this point.
Well, certainly if you've still got Luton in the division or Wickham come up, some of the smaller ones, Bournemouth, they're such small stadiums that's definitely going to help. But also when you're in the Championship, when you look at it from that perspective, it makes you realise how good Norwich have it in that degree of always having a full stadium. You go to a lot of places, and all right, Middlesbrough was full the other day when they played Chelsea, but generally the Riverside's half empty and Reading is half empty and stuff. A lot of these clubs don't enjoy the same support that Norwich do.
Yeah,
I know.
Well, I even remember 10 years ago when the Canaries had their 3-year run in the Premier League, and you'd see them go to Bolton or West Brom, and it was half empty in the Premier League. You'd watch those games on TV.
But what always makes me laugh is if you look back at the attendances from the early 90s when Norwich were doing really well, and they weren't even sold out for the UEFA Cup games because football was in a funny place, wasn't it? Obviously, all the recovery from hooliganism and all those sorts of things from the 80s. The game had a bit of a strange reputation. For instance, my dad wanted to take me to the Bayern Munich home game. I was only 8, I think, 7 or 8. And my mum wouldn't let me go to the game because she was still, in her head, football meant hooliganism. And because it was a German team, she was worried that there was going to be trouble. So, yeah, I missed out on that one. But I remember watching it on TV, but obviously it's not quite the same. But to think that all the sort of glory days were played out in, not a half empty stadium, but not a full stadium like it is these days.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed when I started following, which was I think the 10-11 season, Norwich always seemed to be filled. You rarely saw, oh look, here's a group of yellow seats that's pretty obvious. Versus Villa. Villa always seemed like the seats, wherever the camera view is, their lower tier, always are lots of empty blue seats, no matter who or when. I haven't seen them lately. But I was like, okay, you're such a big club. Why are there always groups of vacant seats if you're such a big club? Why is it that on TV it looks like you have sparse attendance?
I suppose it's sometimes because they're playing Norwich as well. It's not the biggest attraction for the home fans, but there were certainly some big blocks of empty seats towards the end of the Brentford game at Carrow Road recently because people got up and left.
They were done.
That was not the best of days.
So you said Goodison's not good. Which other stadiums are particularly good or bad for visiting press? Locations where you have to go Arlo White, who covers the Premier League he posts regularly his path to the gantry. He'll film it and then he'll rapidly. So if it takes him 10 minutes to go there, the video is like 30 seconds or something. And sometimes the trips are amazing. It's like I have to go take an elevator, then I have to climb these precarious steps up, then I have to climb them down, and then I'm sort of on this small walking area. Then I have to go someplace else. It's insane where he has to go sometimes to cover games.
It's a little bit different for the commentators. They tend to get up on the gantry and get a better vantage than us. Like I'm sure you'll have seen Chris Gorham and Rob Butler have done similar things on their socials, haven't they? Where I've been up on that gantry a few times, and it is a bit of a climb. They have to go up on the roof and across and down, and it is a bit of a climb for them. And particularly, like Rob has to sort of dash out into interview fans on the way out of the ground and stuff, doesn't he? So I'm sure he burns a few calories every week doing that. It tends to be a little bit easier for us for the press box, certainly in the Premier League, that you don't have anything too arduous, and we don't have much to complain about really. Most press facilities are pretty good again because like I said earlier, they kind of have to be. Leeds is not good in terms of the view. I tweeted a few years back. I can't remember which game that would have been. That might have been 2016 or 17, where we were literally sat with a big set of metal steps in line with our views. We couldn't see one end of the ground, and we're supposed to be covering the game, which people found quite funny. Palace is pretty awful as well. The gantry is so low in front of the press box that you can't see the stand on the other side of the stadium. And because of the stanchions and stuff, you don't get particularly clear views. I tweeted something on Boxing Day last year when Norwich lost 3-0 that was on Prime. I might as well have just stayed at home and watched it, because we had terrible trouble on the roads getting there. There was a crash, and then the tube was slow, and we got there late. And I genuinely would have got a better view of the game if I'd have just stayed at home and watched it on my TV. So yeah, you get the occasional one, but it's about being there, isn't it? It's about sensing those moments, like I've just described with that Liverpool goal. You've got to be there to really feel the moment, haven't you? If you're going to report on it, and to spot the little bits and pieces, to see that, I don't know, a player's come limping back on with ice on his leg, or that Dean Smith's had an argument with the fourth official, or whatever. Those things don't tend to get picked up by the TV cameras, do they? So it is so important that you're there, particularly for one of the big pieces of content that I do every Monday morning after a game is the 6 things, which can sometimes be a bit of a challenge. We used to call them 6 lessons we've learned, but we rebranded it because it was a little bit like, well, when Norwich in the Premier League, you don't necessarally learn that much every week. You just learn that they're out of the
reinforce.
Yeah,
sorry, it's gonna be tough.
Have a striker reinforce the week.
It's just 6 different ways of saying the opposition was better than them. So yeah, we sort of rebranded it a bit at some point. But that stuff is very much, you're looking for the little bits of colour and the little bits and pieces that people might not have noticed. Did somebody roll their ankle in the warm-up and that's why they weren't in the game? Christos Jolis was at Liverpool recently, but he wasn't in the squad, but we'd seen he was there and things like that. So it wasn't that he was just totally cast out of the squad or anything. But no, we don't have a lot to complain about in terms of facilities, and obviously we shouldn't, because we don't have to pay to go there. So you've always got to be careful with moaning, and I don't like mentioning food and things like that too much either. I don't think paying fans particularly care if you had a bad pie that was free, to be perfectly honest. you have to you've got to keep your perspective on things and remember what it was like to be a fan, because it might be a bit miserable for us because we have a long journey and we have, we're there 2 hours before and 2 hours after the game or whatever, but we haven't paid to be there and then seen your team fail miserably and then have to go on a 4-hour coach journey home with a load of people you don't really know. So you always got to keep that perspective. And as much as I might moan about the football, I certainly have always tried not to moan too much about the privileged position that we're in.
Right. The disadvantage for you not being on the coach, people are always posting multiple containers of beer that they're drinking on the way back. I'm like, what? It's like, oh, this is what I'm drinking on the way up. There's like 4 cans. Like, really? Okay.
Yeah, big time. We always liked going to Millwall because it was the only press room where you got a beer afterwards, or if you were lucky, because they went pretty quickly. They just dumped a box of Becks or something like that in the press room. And the one that always sticks in my mind was the 4-0 defeat in the early days of the Farker era. And me, Michael and Paddy were the last people in the press room. And there were 3 beers left, which was a big relief. And I don't know why, I don't really know why this is stuck in my mind, but they've got like they're the Lions, aren't they, Millwall? And there was this big cuddly lion, like literally sort of chest height lion that sat next to the desk where the managers had done the press conferences and stuff post match. And we always, we do our Facebook lives and things like that, don't we, post game, and the video verdicts. Mm-hmm. And back in the day, we used to do them as a bit more of a group thing, and they developed to be more of a one person thing. And I remember me, Paddy, and Michael sort of recording something live on Facebook and just trying to get some enthusiasm out of Pad after that game. He was just like, I don't really want to talk about it, to be honest, Dave. And on occasions like that, you could just have you can let the dark humor flow, can't you? Because the fans are feeling exactly the same thing. They know it's been crap. There's no point dressing up. You've lost 4-0 at Millwall. This new guy's come in from Germany, and it's looking absolutely terrible. And some of the players are obviously gone past their sell-by date. Yeah, Naismiths and Martins and things like that. At that point, it couldn't have felt much lower. But we all clung on to that little bit of hope, didn't we? That he was laying the groundwork for something better in the future, and thankfully it did pay off eventually.
Yes,
that's right.
Yeah, I do remember, like, they lost to Millwall 4-0. Wow, that's bad.
It was bad.
Double bad for Mark.
Let's not go there.
Mark's wife is a reported Millwall fan.
Oh, right.
Well, she identifies, to use the current vernacular of how people relate themselves. She kind of identifies as a Millwall supporter. So,
well, you very much got your revenge the next season. Then.
You talk about her in the third person when she's sitting in the same room.
Yeah. Case in point. So,
ladies and gentlemen, we've now had Lindsay Foster give her 2 cents.
That's right.
It could be worse. It could be worse.
My daughter's name is Lindsay, spelled differently, though.
Yeah. I do have one question. When you guys are up on your gantries and whatnot, do they have like rows of monitors that are giving you the TV feed so that you have replay availability and you're not having to look across, the stadium to a big screen or something like that?
That varies place to place. Premier League, it's generally a lot better. I think with the TV guys, they almost certainly do. And if not, they have their own setup. They'll have an iPad or whatever to view their own feed, because obviously they need to keep time with their replays and all that kind of thing. Right. In terms of the press, it varies. At Carrow Road, there are 3 or 4 big screens in front of the press box, which we can view, and certainly where we are, we can see a decent chunk of it. And there's a weird sort of thing that's happened with VAR, to be honest, that we see the VAR replays on those screens before it gets put up on the big screen in the corner or before anyone else sees it. So we know pretty much if a goal is going to be disallowed or if the penalty is going to be awarded or whatever. So once we've seen the replay, we can pretty much make our minds up quite quickly, and what's coming. So the fans in the city stand in the stadium pit start looking over to us to sort of be like, what's going on? Is it going to be a penalty? It sort of adds a bit of pressure. You're almost a bit like, no. But yeah, in the Premier League, most of the grounds, you tend to have a little screen shared between 2 of you. But it's getting better in the Championship as well, because most teams, when they've dropped back down, they've made upgrades to their facilities. We don't have too many struggles with Wi-Fi anymore, which certainly 5 or 6 years ago, most places we went to, the Wi-Fi would be a nightmare, and getting 3G or 4G, whatever, at a packed football stadium generally doesn't work out too well.
Bring your own hotspot and all that.
Yeah. I actually have through work. I have my own Wi-Fi box that I have. I don't know if they remember that I have it, but it's great, because it's the kids will say, remember, it's not mine. I use it. It's not mine. So if I give it to them, it's got to come back.
Yeah.
So we'll use that even now for baseball. I'm a season ticket holder of the Baltimore Orioles and Sunday games. They now, last 2 years, and now providing free Wi-Fi. But still, even in an average attended game for the worst team in the American League, you're going to get 15,000 at this point, 15,000 people as opposed to 40,000. Using the free Wi-Fi isn't a great idea. So we're always using, our, little box, which is great because we don't have to worry about, something not loading or not being there. So do you guys have that? Is that something that
we at Carrow Road, for instance, we have our own press Wi-Fi. So every stadium you go to, you don't have to use the free one that the fans are using. So I think they have free Wi-Fi at Carrow Road for the fans as well now, because we get a few people chipping into the live blog during the game who are in the stands, who at half time or whatever, or even during the game, start chipping in because they want to have their say, which is great. But yeah, in general, we're okay on that front, and I'm still. Well, not too old-fashioned. Maybe, I don't know if there's an old-fashioned thing or not really, but I'm still a great believer in the Ethernet cable. And if I always have one with me, and it's normally always available, and most people don't use it, but it's reliable. You don't lose your connection, and it's generally faster. So that was one of the lessons that I taught Connor quite early on in his time with us. The first few games, he didn't have one, and I kept saying, "You've got to get yourself an Ethernet cable," and he knows how important it is now.
Yeah, I'm the same way because I do a lot of high school football, and I'm the same way. I always have my Ethernet cable with me.
Big time.
So
Mark does basically every sport. He's somehow involved with every sport in the high school.
But not from a journalism perspective, really.
Correct.
So
when you're calling the game, you're
the PA, yeah, that's a little different. But when I'm doing Friday nights, I'm working for my team. So
cool.
Mark
pressure there.
Mark's the stats man, because he lives in Texas, and high school football, and the two biggest high school sports in Texas are football and spring football.
Yeah.
Spring football.
Yes, spring football.
You'll have to explain.
It's preseason training.
Okay.
It's just we get a window, and college is this way too with spring football. You get a window of time where you're allowed to have. You're not in a full pad practice, but your helmets and shells at least, and you're going through things. And for example, I'm at the junior high level, so our 8th graders we're getting ready after. Not this coming week, but next week we'll pivot into spring football because track season will be done with, and so they'll be out there during athletics period and going through. We'll start going through the playbook, whatever the playbook looks like it's going to be for the fall, and however the offensive and defensive coordinators want us to run certain systems for the coming season because they've already got that all planned out. Although I don't know what we're going to do on the defensive coordinator side because our DC has just taken a 3A head coach and athletic director job in Sabine, Texas. So he's almost Louisiana, and he may be bringing some coaches with him. So we're not sure.
David's going, what in hell are you talking about?
Yeah. Well, the coaching carousel has hit us this year. We've been a very stable operation at the high school level. We've really not rotated anybody out for the past four or 5 years.
In some of the major colleges, especially ones that are football crazy, more in the southern part of the United States, the spring football game, which is an intra-squad game, will sell out. You'll have 50 to 100,000 people, depending on the size of the stadium, showing up to see the team play each other. So whatever the colors are, there's always like a white team, and then whatever it is, and they will sell out.
It's quite often a preview too of the high school kids, because you get high school kids that'll graduate in December, and the main reason they graduate in December is so that they can spend that spring football period working with their new college team. And so that's a big part of why these sell out as often is you'll get your blue chips will come in early and you get to see them. It's a preview.
Yeah.
Before the season.
I remember when I was in Tampa with when I met Jeff, and the club were obviously there for their warm weather training camp, as it were. I remember driving past the Bucks stadium, and I was in an Uber, and the driver was telling me that the Yankees always go down to Tampa for their sort of preseason stuff. Yes. Yeah,
that's their spring training.
That's happening right now. Spring training in advance of the baseball season. Right. The Yankees headquarters are in Tampa. So in the U.S., you have the teams are either in Florida or they're in Arizona.
Yeah. And
they play in two separate leagues. The Florida League is the Grapefruit League. The Arizona League is the Cactus League.
Right.
And generally, it's how close each of the major league teams are to each of the two states. So basically, split half west of the Mississippi. They're generally going to be going to have teams in Arizona. East of the Mississippi, they're generally going to have teams in Florida. Yeah, which is interesting. All right, let's get back on track here. So, favorite matches you've attended? You mentioned some of them earlier.
Yeah, I mean, the Wembley 2015 is always going to be very, very special for obvious reasons. It was a very, very hectic day, a sort of a long day, beautiful weather as well. It was kind of more hectic for me because I'm trying to remember what the timeline was, but it was a bank holiday Monday. But in Norwich on the Sunday, we had something called BBC Radio 1's Big Weekend, and quite fittingly, sadly, from the last few days, the Foo Fighters were one of the bands that had played the night before. I'm a big Foos fan, so obviously really sad news about Taylor in recent days. And it was the Foos. They played before Taylor Swift as the headliner, which for Norwich is obviously big time. You don't get those sort of headline global acts come to Norwich at the peak of their careers anyway. You maybe, we've got, I'm going to see Elton John at Carrow Road this summer. We've got the Killers coming as well, actually, this summer, which would be great. I've got tickets for both of them. I saw the Killers play. They played at the UEA in 2004, just as they were getting big as well when Hot Fuss had first come out. So, that's when you tend to get them sort of at the beginning or the end of their career. So that was on the Sunday. That was a brilliant night. And I actually had to, I said that the wrong way around. Taylor opened for the Foos. She was on before the Foos, thankfully. As I said that, I was thinking that doesn't sound right. But I had to leave. That
makes sense because she was probably at the beginning of transitioning the pop away from country.
I suppose so. Yeah, she was sort of she was certainly huge by that point. But yeah, she was doing pretty well by that point. But I had to leave to beat the rush basically because I had to be up at whatever 5 a.m. or whatever for Wembley for us to drive down because we needed to get there nice and early for that one. And I remember walking away from Erland Park and they were playing My Hero and just hearing the crowd singing along to it and stuff, and it was magic. But that was brilliant. And then you're up early the next morning, go to Wembley, brilliant day, obviously, sunshine. I think I interviewed like 9 or 10 people after the game. It was ridiculous mix zone. You could just grab anyone, and 7 or 8 players. I interviewed Alan Balkett, was the chairman, Delia. It was frantic. And then we got kicked out of Wembley about 3 hours after the game, I think. Loads going on, and Paddy's now wife, I think girlfriend at the time, had managed to get into the bar where the club were meeting, where the players and the staff were meeting to celebrate in the Hilton outside Wembley. And we managed to talk our way in. Basically, Alex Neil spotted us and said, "Are you coming up?" And we're like, "Yeah, great, brilliant." And we ended up working on the balcony outside the bar where they were all having their promotion celebration party, with the players occasionally popping out and saying hello and saying, "Are you coming in for a beer?" And we're like, "We hope so, but we've got a 32-page supplement or whatever to fill in the next few hours." So there's me, Michael, Paddy, our former colleague Gav Caney, Peter Walsh, who is now our court correspondent, but he's a news reporter basically, who's a big Norwich City fan. And we were all just beavering away, writing story after story, filling, a great paper for the next day.
Hold on, you just used a new verb, beavering.
Beavering.
Like you mean like busy as a beaver? Is that?
Yeah, I've never heard that, Ken.
No, I've never heard that.
All right.
I've never heard that.
It's not quite what was the one that Cammy got? Cammy said they're defending like beavers, didn't he? On Sky Sports, I think he made that quite famous. Yeah, So I don't know when we got home the next night, 2-3 in the morning, and then the next morning, the Tuesday, I moved house, which was already pre-planned.
Wow.
not knowing obviously that Norwich would get to the playoff final and things.
Right.
Fortunately, my girlfriend's parents were very helpful, and we managed to get a man with a van to help us out. But I basically, I don't know, got up early, packed a load of stuff for about 3 or 4 hours, and then went and worked another 10, 12-hour shift because Norwich had just been promoted at Wembley.
Yeah.
So
it's like your job was, I don't know, put that there. That seems good.
Yeah, basically. It was just manic, but it was brilliant.
Wow.
It's exactly why you do the job, the adrenaline, the energy, just being able to be so close to such a success. So I don't think anything could top that, really. The only sadness I had that day was there was a part of me which wished I was with my dad and who was there with our friends and family and stuff, enjoying that day. And I was so fortunate to be close to it. But also, it's one of those where you wish you were with your friends and family. But you can't have everything, can you? So it was magic. But I mean, the other one is of the Manchester City game in the Premier League in September 2019. That was incredible, as we all know. That roar at the full-time whistle. I mean, I've watched that video on YouTube so many times because just to hear the roar at the full-time whistle, there's the moment, isn't there, where Dermich wins the ball back and Cantwell takes it into the corner, I think, and then gets fouled but doesn't get given the foul, and then the whistle eventually goes, and the noise was just spine-tingling. It was just so unbelievable. It was like an FA Cup giant killing. It obviously wasn't because it was a Premier League game, but Norwich had 9 or 10 players missing through injury.
It was 11.
Yeah.
It was, and I know why, because these guys know that they ask me to be in the fan zone sometimes, a couple of hours beforehand, a Premier League fan zone. Yeah. So it was greatest upset. So they said, can you come on? It was like a really short notice. I had to watch the highlights again and I told them it was Jonathan Joseph and Leroy Rozier were the guys. That's like their Thursday crew. I said, full disclosure, I did not watch it when it was being played because I thought we're going to get killed. And my team, University of Maryland, was undefeated at that time and had, done really well. I says, okay, why am I going to watch this? Let's watch, Maryland play. And my son, who's a Man City fan, normally we would watch it together, and we really weren't paying attention. He's like, you have to see this score. I was like, what? And then we watched it. Yeah, so I had to watch everything. It was just amazing. There was 11 guys out. You had who they had the guy on loan from Sevilla.
Amadou was in
Amadou.
Defense,
Amadou. I didn't even remember him. I was like, oh my God, he played for Norwich. Everyone else's name. I had to look him up to remind myself. So you had a CDM on loan playing back there. They didn't put Teddy back there, which is kind of interesting. You would think Teddy would be in the back. Teddy
he had a bit of experience at centre back for Lille. Bielsa made him captain for Lille, actually, I think, for a season.
Because Teddy played back there a couple of times, and it was just ridiculous. So, oh God, they're just going to get slaughtered.
Yeah, I very nearly did the same thing, to be honest, because it was my best mate's stag night the night before, or in Derbyshire, so 3 hours away or whatever, and we were in a sort of in a house with, I don't know, 15 of us or whatever, having plenty of beers the night before, playing table tennis and foosball and PlayStation and whatever, and just having a good night as you do. And I very nearly, because it was that game, of the same thought process, oh, they're just going to get smashed. Why am I bothering to go back? But thankfully, I did. I mean, it was partly because Connor had only just joined us, because that was not long after Michael had left. And, it's his first game. And I thought, it's not fair. It's too much pressure on the young lads in his first game, isn't it? But what a first game for him. Yeah. He'll never forget that.
Yeah, especially against, Man City, who's going to bring a lot of visiting press.
Yeah, it was a big pressure game on TV, wasn't it? And that was magic.
I think it was so it was 12:30 here. That was
5:30.
5:30, 5:30. Right.
But I also remember a couple of days later, or maybe a few days later, we went down and interviewed Stuart Webber at Colney, and he signed his new contract. That's when they announced it anyway. And I remember him sort of saying that they were annoyed by the coverage. It was global coverage, wasn't it, of how patronising it had all been. As in, like, oh, I can't believe Norwich have been. He was like, we're in the same division. At that point, all well and good. Him and Farke still think that they're going to be able to secure survival that season and build on the first title win and stuff. But frankly, history hasn't been kind to that statement, has it? Because ultimately, ever since that game, they haven't proven to be a Premier League quality outfit at all, really. So as much as his comments were well intentioned at that moment, and he was correct, the reason that people were so dismissive of Norwich has unfortunately been proved correct, doesn't it?
Right. Unfortunately, that trend still continues with the broadcast that we get through NBC or Peacock. I even see people in Norwich who are, I'm not sure who their announcers are. Now, I don't know. The announcers that we get, I don't know if that's the same that you guys are getting over there. And they're so one-sided and biased. When Norwich they're winning against Liverpool, the entire discussion was, when is Liverpool going to get the goal? We know it's going to be coming. We expect it to be coming. Oh, here it is. And of course, they've gotten it. And then the second goal, it was like, okay, now we can continue with regularly programmed, your regularly scheduled program can continue with us saying how great Liverpool is.
And the utter slating of Norwich, just time after time after time.
It happens so frequently.
It is frustrating for Norwich fans, isn't it? Like the Newcastle game, Alan Shearer was the co-coms on Amazon, wasn't he? And that wound up a lot of the Norwich fans because he's obviously so biased. He's a Newcastle fan, Newcastle legend. But ultimately, they're correct most of the time, sadly. It is just a disruption to
correct.
regular programming.
Mark and Jeff know this. Efan Akoko is on a lot of games that we get. God, he is so annoying because whenever someone, if it's, let's say Hanley went up and got a header and it just missed going in, Grant should have done better there. He really should have gotten the goal out of that. I'm doing a bad impersonation. He's always criticizing whatever it is. If it didn't,
he's got a bingo card, I think, that he pulls from.
Yeah, if it doesn't wind up as a goal, he's always criticizing. Oh, they should have done better. They should have done X, Y, and Z. I want to have like a not a highlight or a low light reel of all of his opportunities that he didn't score on, because it's so annoying. Now, a couple of times there's been Karen Carney, that's her name, who's apparently a very celebrated player for in the women's side. And the first time I heard her I says, wow, she's really good, with her everything. And she was extremely neutral the whole time, basically saying, this is what I saw, as a player, this is what I've seen. And I was like, who is this? I had to figure out who it was. And then she wound up being the co-host one time in the studio, and I managed to tell her, hey, I really appreciated your commentary. So yeah. But him as a former player and a Norwich player, is he that much of a perfectionist, or does he feel that because he's a Norwich player, he can be more critical? That's what I can't figure out. But when he's not.
He's a very serious guy, quite clearly, isn't he? I've spoken to him conversationally a couple of times. And I guess there might be a little bit of an element of that he almost feels like he needs to prove that he's not showing bias. He feels like he maybe needs to be a bit tougher on Norwich because he doesn't want to be accused of being soft on them because he's a former player. But I think because obviously I don't really hear commentary very often from Norwich games, but when I've heard him on other games, I think he's generally like that most of the time. He's just a bit of a deep egg, isn't he? He's very he's very serious.
Deep egg?
I like that one. I like that one.
Oh, new words. What is a deep egg?
I like that one.
I don't know. Is that a saying? Have I just made that up? I always thought that was an American phrase, to be honest.
No, I've never heard that before.
Although I used how do you like them apples to my
There
stuff
you go.
not that long ago.
There you go.
And he was like, "What does that mean?" So I mean, I got that from Goodwill Hunting, I'm presuming. But yeah, okay, maybe I don't know if I've just made Deep Egg up. That might be, but that you know what I'm saying. He is a very serious character.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think with a lot of co-commentary, you do get quite a lot of lazy punditry, don't you? You can sometimes tell when people have just turned up and not done their research, because they do a lot of games and they do a lot of different teams. And I know how difficult it is to just pick up, arrive at a stadium and not know much about that team, not watch them regularly.
Which is
unfortunate.
Which is quite surprising, because you have a week to prepare generally in advance versus, like I said, college basketball is, the big tournament is happening right now. During the regular season, many of the announcing crews that cover college basketball will cover sometimes 3 and 4 games a week.
Yeah.
And they have to go to different location, get their research, talk to people and know about it, and be able to confidently and intelligently speak about both teams, despite the fact they've never seen them before. That's what they're covering. And the top crews do an excellent job of that, giving you the impression that, hey, they know both teams, they know what's going on. And I'm always impressed how they're able to do that when they're doing it sometimes 3 and 4 times a week, in the season. The amount of pre-work they do is always incredible for very quick turnaround. And most of the time you have a week in between games. Yeah, sometimes it's 3 or 4. In the championship, it's worse. But it's like, do your homework, have something where you know what's going on, where you can intelligently talk about somebody, So if John Rowe goes into the game, go, oh, Norwich Academy product, John Rowe. Okay, we know that, but what do you know about John Rowe?
Yeah. Then I suppose neutrals are never going to know as much about the club as we are, so they're always going to be frustrating. But
right,
that's why guys like yourselves who are following from a distance still love to get Chris Gorham's commentary where you can, don't you? Because he's the guy that knows, and as many Norwich fans have said in the past, we're very lucky to have Chris covering the club. He's a lovely chap as well. Known him for a long time now, and he's very good at his job, isn't he?
Yeah, Jeff and I know we both try to sync up his commentary with the video. We just turn down the TV feed and turn on Chris's commentary.
I don't,
because it's so much better, at least in my mind.
I don't, because sometimes I was like, oh, I got 5 minutes, get ready. Depending what's going on here.
Yeah.
All right, we diverse a little bit. Favorite goals / performances. You sort of gave the favorite performances you've seen, at Wembley and Man City, but favorite individual goals.
I mean, there's quite a few, but I'll throw a few at you. Mark Libra, I think 2002, when I was still sat in the River End as a young lad. He came off the bench. I don't think we even knew anything about him.
Sorry.
Hay fever season.
Apology here. Yeah.
He came off the bench. I don't think we even knew who he was, really. He just came on, and all of a sudden he scored this brilliant goal against Manchester City. Viva Mark Libra was born. Unfortunately, he didn't do too much more than that, but that was a wonderful moment. Tete against Sunderland in 2013. That was a great goal.
That's shown a lot.
I was sat with Chris Lakey for that one, actually, in the South Stand. I wasn't working in the press box that day, and I can't remember why I think we were. Our company Archant used to have a sponsors box at the game, and occasionally we got to take some of our sort of sports contacts to games, and we took a couple of boxing guys to a game that time. And we were just right behind it. As soon as he volleyed it, we knew it was in. That was a great strike. Similarly, when I sat in the Barclay 2005, Youssef Safri, the sort of 35, 40-yarder against Newcastle. Similarly, I was sort of right behind it. It was a great strike. But the one from recent years that really sticks in my mind, again, I always think this is quite funny with football, that we all have kind of a unique experience of it from wherever you're watching the game, whether it's in the stadium or outside the stadium. You experience it in a slightly different way. And from where we were sat the night that Norwich sealed promotion against Blackburn 2019, Vrancic, that amazing swerving strike. We had the best view in the house right behind it. And as soon as he unleashed it, we knew it was going in. We knew that was basically promotion sealed at Carrow Road, and that we could start writing all the promotion stuff and that the party could begin, because that was it in the bag. And it was such a great strike. So that's always going to be a very, very special memory for me. And that night, again, it's another one of those where when they seal promotion, there's so much going on. There's such a media scrum, me and Michael both trying to get, running around with our phones, trying to get video here and there. I think Michael went on the pitch for that one, and I ended up sort of recording over, I think, can't remember who it was, but Delia and Michael came out, Stuart came out. We interviewed every player we could get our hands on. I remember grabbing Marco Stiepermann, and he had a beer in his hand, and he was very loose-tongued, shall we say. He was a bit sweary. I had to edit a couple of his quotes almost on the polite request of the press officer who had heard some of the things he'd said about the how shall I say it? The Scottish beeps, as he described Hanley and McLean. you can fill in the word for yourself.
Boys,
they're colourful.
Boys,
colourful indeed. Yeah, he didn't mince his words, Stephen. So yeah, I think that they're ones that stand out.
Gotcha. Okay. Difference between covering Farke and Smith for journalists. We asked Connor this, and we had Haji on. And Haji's going to come back for part 2 eventually. Unfortunately, he's caught COVID, so he's now recovering.
Yeah, fortunately, my girlfriend's had it in the last couple of weeks, but she's okay. She's back at work and stuff now. Real surge of it back over here again. It's now that we've sort of opened up fully. But yeah, I mean, on a personal level, not drastically different, because he's also a nice chap. Daniel, obviously, very, very friendly guy, very interesting and characterful person. And he was, sat in so many press conferences, interviewed him so many times, and even things like in pre-season in Germany and things like that. But that's the times where you almost got a little bit of downtime with him, where you could chat with him and stuff like that. And we I think Paddy told this story. I can't remember, it might have been on our pod recently, but for some reason we'd been sat behind the goal, and Farke was sat in a seat with his back to the players and the pitch, and Paddy was sat interviewing him, and I was videoing him, and the players just carried on regardless and started training and started shooting practice, despite the fact that their boss was behind the goal. And more balls were getting closer and closer to us. And I can see that Farke's sort of getting a little bit nervous. The kit men, Pete and John Boy, are there sort of acting as second goalkeepers, trying to block it. It just becomes farcical, basically. But no one actually thinks to say, lads, can you just wait 5 minutes before you shoot? It's only pre-season. It was almost like they were doing it to annoy Farke.
Yeah,
it was probably sort of lighthearted, but yeah, I don't think he was too impressed by that one. But no, I mean, the difference with Smith is that his first few months were all on Zoom. We didn't get to meet him face to face very much, other than his first press conference and a couple of other occasions. But they just started up in the last few weeks doing the face-to-face presses again at Colney, which is obviously much better. And that's when you get that little bit of time off mic or before and after where you can have little chats, and sometimes they can be tense, sometimes they can be friendly, sometimes, that's where you can build a rapport with the manager or the head coach, which is needed, because you think how many times Paddy interviews the managers, in the Championship, in say you have 3 games in 8 days, then he's interviewing the manager 6 times. That's, more than he's probably spoken to certainly his friends, maybe even his wife that week. So it is a quite close relationship with them, and it can be awkward at times, because we obviously have to write critical things about them. But so far, Dean Smith, very, very decent guy. He seemed pretty unflappable. He doesn't get too wound up by things, but I think he's in a place at the moment where almost you can read into his body language, and hopefully things don't get so bad in the next few weeks that this changes. but I think there's almost a little bit of, well, I inherited this mess, so I'm not going to take it too personally. I know you're all going to criticize this because it's a mess, but it's not my mess. The true judgment of Dean Smith will be once he's had one or maybe two transfer windows and we get to see what his style of play is, because at the moment you can't really label a style of play on it. And we all know from his history with Brentford and Villa that he is a manager that wants to play attacking football and wants to have a bit of a sort of swashbuckling his attitude.
Yeah, I think his style of play was defined when you had Ida playing. And that's when it looked like, okay, they might survive. They have something there. There's more grit. There's more want to. And then when he went out, it's like, forget it. We don't know what we're doing.
I still think that was adapting to the scenario, though. I still don't think, and he's almost said that, hasn't he, that he didn't really want to play 4-4-2. His hand was kind of forced by injuries into playing Lise Malou and Sorensen as the 4-4-2, and then Sorensen goes and gets injured in the Watford game. I think, particularly his Brentford team, they played some good football. They had Ben Rama and Malpai and players like that, Sergi Canos, and they played some good football. So it is going to be difficult, particularly if this final 9 games is as bad as we're all fearing it might be, that a lot of people will just be so sick of it that they almost will link that too strongly to Dean Smith. But I think we will see a very different Norwich City team if it's back in the Championship next season. I think we'll see much more technically based, much more trying to control things, much closer to Farke ball, but maybe not quite that far to the spectrum.
What I noticed, the team has more fight to it. They're not resigned to, okay, we're playing this team, we don't have a chance. And he's like, go, what do you have to lose? Of course you have a chance. Go out there, and trying to figure out how to set it up to do that. And then if he gets it wrong, he corrects it.
Yeah.
Farke didn't do a whole lot of that. Smith is like, this isn't working. All right, we're changing this right now, guys, at halftime.
Which is good, but it would be better if he didn't have to make the changes.
Correct.
And that he chose the right thing.
And he does realize that it is good. Like, okay, and wow, look, they're playing so much better. Okay, I appreciate seeing that change, and I appreciate seeing the level of effort that they put out there. One thing that Connor mentioned is that the time of the press conference changed. That Smith did it like 9 o'clock in the morning, and Farke was later.
Yeah, it used to be 1-ish with Farke. He used to do it after their final training on the Friday morning, so that his team news was up to date, basically. But it's pretty common that most of the managers do it before. I guess that's probably emanated from the broadcasters over the years, that they would rather they're early and that they can get their content in the bag early. But obviously that means that in that final training session, Tammy Pukki can break his leg in a challenge or whatever, and you don't know until the team drops at 2 p.m. Unless you manage to find out or the club shares that information. So yeah, that's been a little bit of a change, but it's sort of much for muchness for us.
Okay. Favorite players to interview, current and past players?
Ooh, favorite to interview. I mean, I always like speaking to Grant Hanley because it's quite a challenging interview.
And how? In which ways?
He's a spiky character with a very dry Scottish wit. And if you phrase your sentence incorrectly, then he's going to tell you, and he is going to take the piss a little bit, and he's going to challenge you, and he's going to, even if things are going well, he likes to be a little bit confrontational, but that makes it a little bit of a challenge. And if you ask him a good question, you'll get a good answer out of him. And in general, around all that sort of maybe playfulness and maybe sometimes frustration, he generally will give you a pretty decent answer. Delivered in a very dry way, perhaps. But he's a pretty good talker on the whole. And he doesn't, I spoke to him after Southampton a few weeks ago, and he doesn't tend to sugarcoat things. He'll say things quite bluntly at times, and just will say we've not been good enough and things like that. So yeah, Hanley's quite good. I always like speaking to Pookie just because he's a really friendly bloke, and he just seems like a normal person. You don't tend to get particularly long, expressive answers from him. They're quite short and whatever. But he's always a friendly guy to speak to. But otherwise, I mean, I think generally the sort of the vibe around Norwich and the atmosphere around Norwich means that most people are pretty friendly. For instance, I interviewed Elliot Bennett on Thursday, Friday, a couple of days ago. He was one of the sort of typical friendly Norwich players to speak to, and was exactly the same. He's playing for Shrewsbury nowadays in League One. We'll have that on the Pink app in the next couple of days. Really good to have a catch up with him. So yeah, I can't say I've ever had any massive problems really. Some players don't like doing it. Wes Houlihan famously hated doing media stuff.
Really?
Martin Olsen, Connor had a catch up with him actually the last few days, and it's a really interesting interview. But listening to it, I was quite intrigued by how
I need to watch that because every time because Martin's sister is married to Dirk Nowitzki.
That's right, yeah.
So anytime I would see Dirk Nowitzki go, oh, it's Martin Olsen's brother-in-law. People are like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
The last goal he scored in the Premier League, Dirk tweeted, hey, look at my brother-in-law scored a goal. And people are like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah. Because I'm here in DFW, I would invite Dirk to some of the bigger games if we were doing a watch party at a pub or something. And I guess he's actually an Arsenal fan. So, but he would occasionally tweet, events with Martin, like when the club went up from 2015. He was pretty active on Twitter about that. Well, Swish 41.
Olsen always used to be quite difficult to interview because he was one who just didn't really want to do it, sort of short answers. And I always remember Christmas Eve 2013, I think it might have been, and they did a presser for the Boxing Day game, and it was only me and Chris Gorham that attended for it, and so they even put some biscuits out for us, just to sort of say, well done for turning up on Christmas Eve. And we spoke to Chris Hughton, I think it was, if I remember my timeline right, and then Olsen came in, and he didn't often do interviews anyway, but he was like, why are you guys here? It's Christmas. Go home. Why do you want to talk to me? And then
I don't score goals.
The whole interview was a bit like he was just sort of joking around. He wasn't really taking it very seriously,
Gotcha.
Which probably worked better for radio for Chris than it did for print for me.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm not going to ask you who you hated because that's not something you're going to reveal.
Yeah, I honestly
we're not asking that. It's not like, who's the worst interview? No, you're not going to do that because that's.
I'll say that I always found Alex Neil very spiky. He had a tendency to say to whatever you said and however you phrased it, he'd disagree with you, even if he was then going to go on to agree with you. He was almost interesting. He was almost sort of contrarian. Like whatever you would say, he'd be like, no, but then he'd talk his way around, and you'd think, well, actually, he has agreed with me in the end. He had a bit of a demeanor of, well, what do you know? You're just a reporter, and I'm a football manager. I know better than you, and of course you do. Like, I'm not a football manager. I'm not a former professional footballer,
right?
But I just felt like he always gave off that vibe, and he had a bit of a death stare on him, didn't he? What was the thing he used to joke about? The curly finger.
Oh yeah, there was a Twitter account with that finger out there at one time.
That was a terrible Scottish accent, by the way, but you knew what I was getting at.
Yeah, well, Haji said, don't call him Alex, call him Alec. He said that's the correct pronunciation.
You'll have to get Michael on the pod for that.
We hope to get Michael has agreed. We just haven't been the scheduling hasn't worked. Michael said, sure, I'll do.
I'm pretty sure that Michael actually asked him one day, and Alex just said, I don't care. Call me what you want.
Gotcha. All right, we were going to ask about the women's league being integrated, and then you don't know a whole lot about that. We just know, we like the fact that it's going to be integrated. We, as the AmeriCanaries, sponsor 4 women on the team.
Yeah,
right. Which is great. I know the Canaries Trust sponsors one. They've been match sponsors a couple of times. It's a lot easier when you're actually there physically to do that, and actually are collecting dues as opposed to,
Yeah, well, that seems like a good development recently, doesn't it? The fact that they've properly integrated them into the club. But I think it's almost, from what I can tell, it feels like it's the start of a new journey for them, doesn't it? That they're not doing particularly well at the moment anyway, so they might have to drop down another level. So I think there's probably going to need to be a bit of patience before they can build up. But certainly the fact that the club have now started to publicize them a bit better and people are a bit more aware of them, I think obviously it's a good step in the right direction, but I think there's a lot more work to be done around that side of the club, isn't there?
Megan mentioned she really appreciated that, and she also told me, it was just me and her, because we did it like on a Tuesday afternoon, and these two were working. I was teleworking, so I can sort of disappear at 4 and no one really know that some of the struggles that they have to go through, that they're basically all part-time people, and they get to train once a week, and some of the things that they have to deal with, but with her experience in the US and what she did on the Community Sports Foundation, it was just really interesting getting an overall feel for, okay, this is what we're doing. It would be great if we had far better support, and the fact that they can train at the Nest, with all the amenities there, which is great. So I'm hoping, they're close. I mean, they've had some competitive matches. They've had some other ones where I checked the score. Oh, that's not good. That's a lot to a nothing. So there appears to be a big gap between the top teams, and some of the teams are just Sometimes you get that. Teams. Yeah, sometimes you get that here. With women's teams on the college level, you'll get that. The men and the women are both doing the basketball playoffs, and the very top women's teams don't get upset by the teams with lower seeds. It just doesn't happen. Versus on the men's side, so there's 68 teams. So it's basically you have won the 16 seeds in 4 different tournaments. So a 15 seed team, St. Peter's from Jersey City, New Jersey, a very small Jesuit school. Who they knock off? Was it Kentucky?
They started with Kentucky, then Murray State, and then Purdue. So they've beaten a 2 seed and a 3 seed.
So they are in there, and they're today they're playing University of North Carolina. So you can have them on the men's side, where you can have a bunch of gritty guys from the New York area, which is a bit basketball hotbed. Odds are you're not going to have a women's team from a small Jesuit college go up against one of the big powers. The gap is so huge in the women's game sometimes between your really top players versus the men's. You're more likely to see upsets. It's leveled out a lot. The women, it's still the very strong program. So it's interesting. The super teams or whatever are going to be up there.
Even the top 4 or top 8 gap between them and, say, a 20 or a 25th best team is pretty sizable as well.
Right. So the women's game is getting better here, but you still have some teams just are very good for a long time. And the men's, it's that way, but there's a lot more variety. There's a lot more ability for men's teams to spring upsets. Famously, a couple of years ago, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC, basically, it's a campus, it's a satellite campus, University of Maryland. It's almost a commuter school, and they beat the number one overall seed, who you think is going to be the best overall. as a 16 seed, and it never happened before. So yes, or since. So it's the very first time that it happened. In the women's side, you don't get that. A 16 seed is going to be a smaller school, and if they play the number 1 seed, it's going to be something like 92-29, which is kind of close to one of the games that happened this year. So it's just interesting.
You don't even get a 15-2 in the women's side. You don't even get a 15-2 upset, and you get a 15-2, probably about every 7 or 8 years on the men's side.
Right.
You get them reasonably often.
A number 2 seed would be a team in their ranking. They do a poll in the ranking. This would be a team that would be ranked anywhere from 5 to 8, and then a 15 is a team that probably
60th.
won their conference tournament of a very small conference with some smaller colleges. So generally the teams that are ranked higher are much bigger schools with lots more infrastructure, lots more money involved than the school. So St. Peter's plays in just like a glorified gymnasium.
It's a high school gym.
Right.
I mean, my high school's gym is bigger.
Versus teams that play at arenas that hold like 17,000, like O2 Arena or something, indoor arena. So just interesting, that on the men's side, there's more likelihood of a smaller team beating, a team that has more prestige, more history than on the women's side. And on the women's side, some of the teams are building their programs and then they're strong for a very long time, which is interesting. All right. Now, speaking of competing, this is the penultimate series of questions here. All right. So I'm going to read it. Can Norwich compete with the ultra-rich clubs under the current structure of the Premier League? And then if no, which we think that answer is no, what needs to change or what would you like to see change? And the 4 areas that I highlighted: ownership, recruitment, playing style, culture, and anything else. So we're assuming that answer is no.
Yeah, it is no, isn't it? The ultra-rich clubs, the top 6, top 8, no chance. I mean, we've seen it again recently. Manchester City at Carrow Road, just the way they move the ball, the confidence, the quality, it's different level. They are going to struggle to compete with that. Ultimately, to beat one of those teams, to pull off an upset, you have to catch them on a bad day probably, or you have to force them into a bad day. Mm-hmm. You're not going to outplay them. Even the 3-2 win against Manchester City, which we spoke about, it was a backs to the wall job. They really had to ride out their luck. They had to cling on desperately at the end of the game because Man City were battering away at the door. And
when I looked at the highlights, I was like, "Oh my God, how did they win this?" Oh yeah, it was like 30 minutes of just battering the goal.
Yeah, I think it's 32 attempts that Man City had at goal in that game, if I'm remembering that correctly. So, but the point is more that they don't have to compete with them, isn't it? It's this season, it's Brentford, it's Leeds, it's Watford, Burnley, etc. And if they'd have won those 2 games recently, Brentford and Leeds, they would be bang in the mix for survival. And that's where it's got to be done. I wrote a piece about it last summer. We all know it's the case, and there's no reason why you can't compete with those clubs, even though Norwich are the outlier. Everybody has more money than them. Brentford have more money than them. But to bring it around to the ownership stuff, I get that for some people, you've got to direct your fury somewhere at the moment because it is embarrassing and it's crap. But it's the ownership have allowed them to win the championship title twice with this model. And they allowed them to spend 60 million last summer with over 20 million more if they stayed up to make those deals permanent and fees and etc. So that despite the self-funding and despite losing 30 million due to COVID as a self-funded club with no wealthy benefactor to stomach that for them, they still were able to splash pretty significant cash. Certainly for Norwich, that is by far the most they've ever spent in a transfer window, even with the sale of Emi Buendia, which, all right, 33 million up front, but they don't get all that money at once in the same way that you don't get all the broadcast money up front. It is a delicate financial challenge for a club like Norwich to do it. So for me at the moment, I'm happy with the ownership, but there have been times when my thoughts have wandered down as a fan where my thoughts have wandered down that path. Have they got to move on from Delia and Michael? Have you got to get in someone wealthy? But I don't want to see, look at what happened with Burnley. They've been bought out by a venture capitalist group, essentially, haven't they? Of a conglomeration of rich people who, with no real identity, they've got some front man who talks the talk. But I think Burnley are on the downward spiral, and unfortunately, a bit like Huddersfield, their local businessman has moved on, has cashed in his chips when he's got them established in the Premier League after all the hard work that went into establishing Burnley in the Premier League, and just to get Huddersfield in the Premier League. I'm just using them as two examples. If there's a billionaire out there, James Dyson is from Cromer originally, the inventor, the creator of the Dyson Hoover brand, etc. But he clearly must not have any interest in football, and doesn't live in Norfolk anymore, because he's never taken over the club, and he could certainly afford it, as far as I know, because he's a billionaire. If there's someone like that wants to take over from Delia and Michael, then great, because they've got their club's best interests at heart, and can give them that little bit of financial muscle to take a few more risks here and there, and maybe have the extra 2 million available to buy Christopher Ayer, or the extra few million to get Adam Armstrong or Philip Billing, or all those players that they wanted last summer but missed out on. Two clubs who did have billionaire owners or very wealthy owners behind them to allow them to spend that bit more money. Even Brentford, they've got a very wealthy owner. Brighton, they all do. At Norwich are the totally different case. So for me, if it really is fine margins, things look bad now, but it only really would have taken one or two of the players brought in last summer to have a better season. Josh Sargent in particular, I suppose. If he scores 5, 6, 7 goals this season, could have been if he'd have scored against Brighton instead of that horrendous miss. All those little moments, they definitely could have survived this season. But in the end, you can now just see that the confidence has gone, and that they're in a bit of a muddle, and that they've maybe lost belief that they can compete at that level, and they've wasted too many opportunities. Again, as we've seen against Brentford and Leeds recently. So I get the frustration and the anger and everything, and people want to direct that in some direction. It goes at Webber, or it goes at Farker or Smith or Delia and Michael, or just the players, or whoever. But ultimately, in the big scheme of things, Norwich are still going to be in a great position financially in the Championship next year. In Dean Smith, they've got a head coach who almost every club at that level, I would have thought, would quite happily have him. They'll have potentially a lot of very good players, and they should bounce back. And if they ever manage it, if they manage to survive again at that level, it would be so much sweeter and so much more satisfying to do it with the current model, and to have bucked the trend and not had a Russian billionaire or a Saudi billionaire with questionable morals behind that money to get them to that point. And it's sort of the dream. But also, it was only 10 years ago that Norwich did it under Paul Lambert. They went from League One to the Championship, and then finished 12th in the Premier League with these owners, with a maybe slightly different but very similar self-funding model. Maybe it wasn't quite as well branded as it is now, and then survived again under Chris Hughton, and they made a mess of it the following season when they shouldn't have gone down. So for me, it's a delicate balance, because you could bring in someone with money and it could go completely wrong. You could bring in someone with money and it could be brilliant. You could go on a Leicester journey, but it would be a bit of a gamble. And I feel like where they are now, they're more likely to survive in the Premier League than by taking that massive gamble, because it would be such a shift. But yeah, as Delia and Michael have always said really in their public answers, that if someone's out there who's got Norwich City at their heart with a lot of money to spend, then by all means bring them in and let them crack on. But otherwise, it feels like too much of a gamble. But I can't say things like that without some fans just saying, oh, well, I'm drinking from the Carrow Road Cup or whatever, that I'm in the club's pocket. That is just my honest belief. I would rather they went at it with Delia and Michael, but I totally get the frustrations. It's just there isn't an easy answer to this. Ultimately, if they had got the recruitment right last summer, just a little bit more than they did,
that's the question.
They could well have been staying up. And as I wrote recently, if they stayed up this season or 2 seasons ago, all this noise from TalkSport and all the clickbait rubbish about Norwich being a waste of time and stuff would completely transform into what an amazing job Norwich have done. They've done it without a billionaire owner. They've done it with a self-funding model. They'd be the darlings of English football. So
maybe
the
they
difference
still slate them. I think nobody's going to say that.
Well, I think a lot of the serious media would. Maybe talk media aren't going to. Yeah,
right. That's what I meant.
yeah. Talk's probably never going to.
A lot of the legit journalists,
right? Serious media, exactly the way you put it is exactly right.
They just say things to get a reaction. They're just filling airtime, aren't they?
The recruitment was interesting because in my view, they brought in 3 legit Premier League players, and the rest are like in between Championship and Premier.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, like I think Josh Sargent, it will probably come good in the Championship next year. Whether that's as a striker or not, I don't know. But he's still a young man. Crystal Jolis could have a very good career next year. I really hope that if they do go down, they keep hold of Rashica, because I think he'd probably be the best player in the division. If they,
he's definitely Premier League quality. Yeah.
Hopefully, if they keep Pookie, he can end up getting those goals to make him. He could even overtake Ewan Roberts in the top 10 goal scorers. But I totally get the frustration. I share it with everyone. It is so frustrating, and of course for everyone at the club as well. They desperately want to survive, but they just have managed to get in a muddle again, and it looks like, short of something pretty special, and it's just going to be deja vu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's like, who else said that they brought in Lise Malou, who is, I'll say he's Premier League quality. He's shown enough. He's shown enough, and then Norman, and then everyone else is struggling or below.
I think Norman was really good before his injuries. Not really hit it since he's come back. Lise Malou has shown flashes, but I don't think he's done it consistently. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, I've never been a huge Giannoulis fan. I know some people like the fact that he runs down the wing quite quickly, but he can't really defend particularly. So for me, it's always been Williams ahead of him in the pecking order. Probably, if I'm perfectly honest, if you've got a fully fit Sam Byram, I'd pick him ahead of both. But sadly, that we're waiting to find out whether he's actually got a serious injury problem again or not, aren't we? We haven't heard anything on that front yet, but he's sort of dipped out of things again recently, hasn't he? Which is a great shame. But yeah, otherwise, I mean, Billy Gilmore, less said the better, really. I feel a bit sorry for the lad. It's not been a good move for him, and it will probably have toughened him up in lots of ways. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if it ends up, like a Harry Kane story, and he ends up being a top player, because he's obviously got technique, but just physically and mentally, I just don't think he's there, and he can't defend well enough for a team scrapping against survival. Yeah. And I don't think he should have been in the team anywhere near as much as he has been. Frankly, he could have gone back in January.
Yeah, I saw some discussion about his playing time predicated on finances. Like there's some weird reverse incentive to give him more playing time.
I think that's true, but we're not talking millions, so it's not. Very certain that Stuart Webber has not ever said to Farke or Smith, you have to play Smith to get the price down, because we're not talking a defining amount of money. It's not like they got to pay them 10 million. I think the loan fee was like 500,000. So you're talking about winding it down by, a couple 100,000 or something.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in the camp where, okay, I wanted, when Smith came on, all right, let's see what he has. And then you realize that he's a huge defensive liability. And he's just not accurate enough with his passes to keep a starting spot.
I think it's positioning. I think Alex Tete has always been a great example of that. A good defensive midfielder, Ollie Skip, obviously last season. It's just, you're in the right place to start with, aren't you? You can put out a fire before it begins.
Right.
And for Gilmore, you watch so many of Norwich's goals, particularly when he was supposed to be the deeper lying midfielder. He is the wrong side of the player who's attacking. He's chasing back. He's already lost the battle. Whereas and probably in a few years' time, he'll have that positional now. So he'll have that down and he'll be good at it. But whereas Tete would already have been goal side of that player and already would have stopped them, because a lot of Tete's work always, And Tete wasn't a top Premier League defensive midfielder. He was good from Norwich's sort of level, but he often didn't measure very well in the stats. You know, he didn't necessarily pull off clean tackles and make blocks and things like that, because he was just on the player's toes and he'd just nibble in and nip the ball away and things like that. That's what a defensive midfielder does, really, don't they? They just disrupt things. Declan Rice at the moment is a good example of that, but he also is an absolute Rolls Royce of a player with the ball at his feet. So Gilmour, if you compare him to Rice, you know, they're not too dissimilar in age. I think a couple of years between them, but just look at the difference in physicality. Rice has probably got a foot on him, hasn't he? So it's a big difference.
Yeah, he's smaller. Yeah.
The physicality of the Premier League is you know, top level. Obviously, the quality is very good, but the step up from the Championship in terms of how quick, how strong everyone is as well. I just feel that Gilmour probably would have been better off playing for Rangers this season and getting himself 10, 12 assists, where he would have fitted in better, or at the top end of the Championship. That's more where he's at, and he is going to probably be something which will frustrate us all for the next 10, 12 years as we see Gilmour winning Premier Leagues and Champions Leagues and doing well for Scotland and whatever, and thinking, well, how can he do that when he didn't do well for Norwich? I just don't think it was the right move for him. I think Norwich are a team scrapping against relegation, and that's not what he needed.
Versus Brandon Williams, I think, was a good fit. You know, he's getting playing time and showing he's a pretty darn good player, even on the wrong side.
Possibly, although I don't think he's showing that he's a Manchester United standard of player. I think he's looked somebody who has got the sort of mindset and determination for a relegation battle and has got stuck in. But he's made a fair few mistakes along the way as well. He is still quite raw, isn't he? But I like the raw ingredients that are there, but I think he's still got quite a way to go before he's going to be a Manchester United regular.
That's why they sent him to get more playing time to see, you know, what was going on. Yeah. All right. So we had playing style culture. You know, that's sort of there. So let's go to the last question, because we're already at a minute 50. Not a minute, hour 50. So this isn't the longest one, by the way. Josh Tompkinson's mom, we had her on for Thanksgiving. That went on. That was like our Thanksgiving special. We had
John.
John. What's Josh? So they don't like scribble thing. Yeah, Jonathan. We had both the mom and the dad on.
Oh, cool.
So that was pretty interesting. So last question that we have before we wrap it up: who's the most famous person you have met?
Yeah, I had to think a bit about this, to be honest. I mean, the obvious answer is Delia. I've been fortunate enough to have a couple of meals with her and stuff at events at Carrow Road and things. And she is a very famous lady, both within and outside of Norwich City circles.
In the US, Mark and Jeff, who would you compare her to as far as like a famous cook, chef? Do you know who should be roughly comparable to?
You know, maybe we got so many TV chefs over here. I don't know that I'd put her at the Julia Child level. No. Cora, maybe. I mean, just on the women's side, but I don't want to limit her to that.
I don't know. One thing. Well, it's not Martha Stewart, because Martha Stewart has like a whole.
Rachel Ray.
Rachel Ray is what I was thinking of. So, do you know who Rachel Ray is, David?
I don't know, but I would also say with Delia that a lot of her fame was before I was born. So she's sort of a is that the right word? Like a heritage celebrity almost. Because I mean, I heard about her and I've seen the cookbooks on my mum and grandma's shelves and stuff. And the sort of the legend that I always heard is, if I'm remembering it correctly, is that basically what Delia would do on TV would affect the sales of things in the shops. So I think she encouraged cranberry sauce with turkey at Christmas one year, and basically cranberry sauce was impossible to get hold of that Christmas. So that kind of thing. So what Delia said mattered
I love cranberry sauce
70s and things like that.
So we were trying to compare. So Rachel Ray started on the Food Network a while ago, and she's based in New York, and it was like 30-minute meals. And then she got so popular. She also, at the time was younger. She's, a relatively attractive woman, and her shows got popular. And then she now developed. She has more shows. She has a little bit of an empire or something. But she's not super wealthy. I was correlating. Delia would be like if Rachel Ray decided, I'm going to buy the New York Jets, or one of the New York teams that was struggling, and then having to come up against like the owners of like Kroenke, who owns Arsenal, or even Khan, who owns Fulham. Coming up
against the Islanders.
Yeah. But still coming off some excessively wealthy people, she would struggle, even though she was very successful at that level. She would struggle financially against some of the super wealthy. So I think it's almost going back. We like Delia and Michael. You just rich. They were richer.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You told me that you were going to ask that question. It was quite fun to think back. I never really thought about that question, like who's the most famous person. I mean, obviously, pretty much everyone within the Norwich City circle I've interviewed over the years, which has been such a great privilege. I was trying to probably the highest achieving footballer I can think of. I interviewed Marcel Desailly once, the former Chelsea and France defender who won the World Cup when I was on work experience at The Guardian when I was a bit younger. So he was pretty high profile. John Motson, I interviewed, the legendary commentator about Norwich. He commentated on the UEFA Cup games, didn't he? And I ended up, I called him, and at the start of the phone call, he just finished doing an interview for, I think, Match of the Day or Football Focus or something about the very same thing. So at the start of it, he was a bit tetchy. He was, oh, well, I've just done it for the BBC website. You'll have to take it from that. Sorry, I'm not going through it all again. And I was like, initially, I was like, oh, it's a bit disappointing. I was looking forward to speaking to John Motson. But I had a bit of a trump card up my sleeve. And Tim Shepherd, the former Norwich physio, I'd been and interviewed him a couple of weeks before. And he had been suspended for the second leg of the Inter Milan game. I think I'm right in remembering that. He had been punished for having the... for daring to go and help one of the Inter Milan players who was injured.
Oh no, horrible!
Yeah. Or it might have been the Bayern Munich. I can't remember precisely. So he wasn't allowed to be on the bench for the second leg, and he got talking to John Motson before the game, or after the game, and he gave him his commentary notes and signed them. And Tim still had them in immaculate, like in a frame, and he photocopied that and let me take it away to reproduce it in the paper. So I quickly got the story out to tell John Motson and get him interested. And then in typical Motti fashion, he was like, oh, right. And then he just went off and talked for about 15, 20 minutes. And I barely had to ask a question and told me all this stuff, because basically I wasn't just ringing up and asking him to just reproduce stuff, but we actually had a separate line. So that was quite good. But I'll give a mention to Ben Youngs as well, who's I don't know if you guys know much about rugby, but recently he's from Norfolk. Him and his brother both played for England. Their dad played for England as well, but he's recently just become the most capped ever England player, and he played rugby for Holt and North Walsham. And I followed his career a lot. And before I was doing Norwich full time, I used to interview them quite a lot. I got to cover the England games at the Rugby World Cup in 2015 when they were played in England. And so he's a pretty famous guy over here as well. But
Jeff's agreeing. Jeff is more of the Anglophile than Mark and I are.
Yeah.
Actually, having lived over there.
I don't know anything about baseball. Not at all.
Mark and I can talk baseball ad infinitum. I can reach up here and get a variety of. I have signed baseballs. I have baseball bobbleheads. And I have a Norwich. A glass here or whatever.
The one other guy I was going to mention was there was a few, because I used to be a news reporter as well, and you occasionally get people come to Norwich to do like a book signing or to promote their book. So John Hurt came to Norwich. I don't know if you'll remember. He was a very high profile actor, very decorated actor, Alien, Elephant Man, all those kind of big films. He actually he lived in Norfolk. He retired to Norfolk basically, and he became a patron for Cinema City in Norwich. They had like an educational program, and I got to sit down and have a cup of tea with him and chat to him for about 45 minutes about his career and stuff. That was amazing. But also Michael Palin of Monty Python.
Monty Python. There you go.
He came to Waterstones in Norwich to promote his book, and again, there was as usual as a journalist, there tends to be a sort of a bit of a story to it that he'd been signing autographs for hours, like an hour or two or whatever, queuing around the block to get his autograph, and I waited patiently for my chance. It was prearranged that I was allowed to interview him and stuff, but his publicist decided, no, sorry, we've got to go. We've got to move on to the next city or whatever. He's taken too long. You literally you can ask him one question or something. And I had a bit of an argument with this guy. Then I actually got to Michael Palin, who sat perfectly calmly on a sofa having a cup of tea. Ask him a question. Away he goes. We talk for 20 minutes, and he says about how he used to go on holiday to the Norfolk Broads, and his family regularly came to Norfolk for holidays as a lad, and he was more than happy to talk for quite a while his publicist paced frustratedly, and I just glanced at him occasionally.
For the U.S. audience, I would tend to think John Hurt or Palin. I'm sure many of the people listening are aware of the other names. I'm not. I would have to do some research, but I saw Monty Python a lot. That was on the public broadcasting. That they would show it, and now of course you can get the uncensored version of Python and John Hurt. The story about Palin reminds me when my son was much younger. God, how old was he? He was a freshman in high school, so 9th grade, and we attended it's like a baseball card memorabilia show at a hotel.
Right.
And walked around, and then we noticed that Frank Robinson, who was a two-time MVP in baseball, World Series champion, in the Hall of Fame, outfielder, was there. And I said, you need to see if you can interview him. I don't know how many times you're going to be in a place where you're going to have the opportunity to interview someone that famous and someone with that long of a celebrated career, with a variety of awards. So we talked, and I says, okay, this is who he is. He's a journalist. Is it possible to interview him? Because people were there, they had bought tickets to have him autograph something, and they said, possibly. Wait till everybody is done with it, and then I'll hang out and catch my attention, and then we'll let you come up and say it. Says you as the dad interview, and he goes okay, and he'll probably do three. We're told 3 questions, so he had the 3 questions. So he goes up, and then Frank had a reputation as being kind of gruff, not very friendly, and introduce him. And then my son asks him the questions. He was more than happy to answer the questions. He even went fairly long on some of the answers, because he's like, okay, here's a young kid interviewing me. He's not pestering me. He's asking me some intelligent questions. So it says, there you go. So take the opportunity to interview somebody. So it's a similar thing where he was very forthcoming with the answers, more than we were led to believe. We thought they were going to be very short, brief answers, and they weren't. They were kind of thoughtful answers, but we wanted to make sure that he had time, and thanked them. And then we saw him several years ago. He died recently. He was on the elevator at the Orioles Stadium. Would take an elevator behind home plate to our seats sometimes, and those elevators are the same bank of elevators that the press use, that the players use to go underneath. So he happened to be in the elevator one time, and my daughter fist bumped him or something. I didn't go, oh yeah, my son interviewed you ages ago at this hotel. You didn't have enough time. So that's an example where you see somebody that is famous, you want to interview them, and you think they might be resistant, and they're not. Which is kind of
It's
interesting.
interesting that you encouraged your son to do it as well, because my dad did
absolutely.
my dad did something very similar when I was still a teenager, and it was when I was first starting the Pinkham podcast. And I, like I said, I did a bit of a match day experience, and it was that was the end of 2008 season. It was the game that they lost 4-1 at Hillsborough, Sheffield Wednesday. It was Huckabee's final game and Dublin's final game, but we didn't know that Hucks was being released. So there was all that fuss with the fans being very angry with Glenn Roeder that we didn't get the chance to say goodbye to Hucks. And that was the season that they survived in the Championship under Roeder before things went wrong. And coming out of the game with my dad, Roger Mumby was sort of talking to fans and almost like apologizing to fans that it had been a bad season. He was the chairman at the time, so not the same sort of profile, but similar. I was like, oh, that would be great to get an interview. I don't know if he'd speak to me. And my dad was like, well, just find out, and shoved me towards him. And he did it. He was absolutely fine, and gave me a, not a 10-minute long in-depth interview, but he gave me a few minutes and said, yeah, the board will do everything they can to support Glenn in the transfer market and all that sort of stuff. And but if my dad hadn't given me the push,
right, you would tend to think as a young journalist interviewing someone who's more established would want to go, oh, he's a young kid, young female, sure, let's give them some time, to show that, hey, I'm not a jerk. You tend to think, oh, it's a kid, or if it's a student or stuff like that, which reminds me of my work with the federal government. I used to have to answer all these letters that came in. I would always make sure if a letter came in from a student somewhere that I would give them a really good, thoughtful answer. Because when I was a student and I had to send something, you appreciated getting something back. It's like, oh, look, I got an answer. And it wasn't just a blow-off answer. So I'd always take time to make sure that I gave them something good, and then would point them to other areas. Oh, you're interested in this? Here are some other resources. So I always want to make sure that a young person had a positive experience with the federal government in writing and sending in a letter. As it's the same thing. You want a young person. Oh yeah, I got to interview Frank Robinson. You did what? Stuff like that. Or you got to interview Michael Palin, and he gladly sat and talked to you for a while.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, we're over to 2 minutes. I don't know if we've reached Jackie's level here, but right. So before we go, so you are now transitioning?
Yeah, professionally, yeah.
Yeah, professionally. Good. That's a very good disclaimer. Professionally.
Yes, my time with the Sports Desk is coming to an end. Yeah. So 8 years, 8+ years. I got an opportunity come up recently to join the news desk of the Eastern Daily Press. Basically, we as we have already mentioned, we've launched the Pinkham Plus app recently. The EDP version will be launching shortly, and I'll be sort of at the forefront of that project as it launches for my news colleagues, basically from my experience of recent months. And as I said earlier, I was with news for 3 years earlier in my career. I still know a lot of those guys well, and obviously picked up quite a bit of experience from the intervening 8 years. So it was quite a difficult decision really to step away from sport, but sometimes you need a bit of a change and a bit of a freshening up, and the project that I was sort of approached about, I thought was quite exciting and a good change of pace, and also means I can go back to being a fan, so that's nice. So I'm looking forward to maybe a couple of away days. I don't think I'll get a season ticket straight away. I think I probably need a little bit of time where football isn't sort of every second of my day, because it does dominate your life. Obviously, when you work in the industry, it's quite difficult to switch off from it. So it's taking on a bit of seniority and a bit more responsibility, almost stepping into management. And I'm 36 later this year. I'm getting married next year, and it just. Yeah. I've had a great, so I've had a great run. And
Dave and his fiance are registered at Argos.
So yeah, just it just fitted at the right time, and I will miss it, and I'll always look back on these 8 years incredibly fondly. It's been a hell of a ride, and whoever gets to sort of fill the spot in the team on the Pinken team is a lucky person who will, I'm sure, have a really enjoyable career and will love working with Paddy and Connor and all the other guys, and hopefully we'll do a good job. And I suppose the one thing I would always hope that from the fans' point of view is that some people may not like my style, some people will, and that's the same for all reporters and all broadcasters and everything, isn't it? That some fans have sort of certain styles that they prefer, but the one thing I'd always hope is that people felt I took my responsibility seriously, that I worked hard, and that I did my best to do a good job, and that I don't think many people could sort of throw it at me that I've been lazy or that I've been just sort of phoned it in, I suppose, is another bit of an Americanism, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
There you go.
I think I've given it a good crack over that 8 years. So I hope that, I look forward to being a fan again.
Awesome. Well, on that, we'll wrap this up. Thank you very much, David, for joining us.
Yeah, nice to speak to you all.
It's been good speaking to you again, Dave. Best of luck to you in your new ventures as well.
And
look forward
to
very
much. Yeah, and good work following from afar. I'm sure you will have to get up early every now and again.
And every now and again, championship season especially.
All right, we're going to wrap this up. Hold on. All right. And thank you very much. This concludes the podcast. Podcast number 19 will be with somebody. We'll figure it out. With a variety of different people we're trying to go on. We hope you'll like the guest. All right.